Hi, everyone. We see you guys joining into the meeting. We're going to get started here just a few minutes after 5, so just hang tight. Just a few more minutes here. We're waiting for 2 more panelists to join us, and then we'll get started.
I think it worked.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can they see us?
We can see and hear you guys. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Evan, Lynn, just let us know when you guys are good, and I'll go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, sorry, we were at the client meeting and just came over to the Kearney office. So give us 1 minute to set up here.
No problem.
Yeah, okay.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Business Analyst Interview Overview webinar. My name is Grace Palmieri, and I am the recruiting coordinator based out of our Chicago office. I began with Kearney in June of 2021, so been here a little bit over a year. And then I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it and kick us off with some logistics for this evening. All right, so to submit questions throughout the presentation, please use the Slido feature. That'll be located on the right side of your screen. And then once that question goes live, if you want that answered as well, you can actually upvote that so we can see which ones are the most popular throughout the course of the webinar. If you want your question answered anonymously and for your name not to be shown, you can actually send that directly to Jen Yu. She's going to be working the back end of our webinar as well. And then we have a pretty packed agenda for today. So if your question does not get addressed, no worries. You can send it to that email that you see in bold purple, and I can also send that in the chat at the end of the webinar too as well. Awesome, and I'm going to pass it over to Lynn for introductions.
Hi everyone, my name is Lynn Chen. I'm an associate with Kearney based in the Chicago office. So I joined the firm in 2020, so in the midst of the pandemic, out of undergrad from University of Michigan, where I studied chemical engineering. So since I've been with the firm, kind of doing a random walk in terms of industries and practices, so I joined as a generalist. So I've done a lot of my work in strategic operations space, logistics, supply chain. Also, most recently, been working with a lot of the beverage alcohol clients, which is pretty interesting to work with clients that we enjoy their products from time to time. So yeah, definitely enjoyed my time here at Kearney. I'll pass it over to Evan.
Hi, my name is Evan Osterly. I am also an associate out of the Chicago office. Lynn and I are working on the same project right now, so we spend a lot of time together. I went to University of Michigan as well, studied business and computer science. I interned with the firm summer 2019 and have been back full-time since fall 2020. So I have a really wide variety of industry and functional experiences. I won't list them all out, but I'm definitely a generalist. And yeah, but beyond project work, I'm involved with social impact work, some of our mental health initiatives, and lots of recruiting initiatives at the firm.
Love it. Hi guys, my name's Claire. I'm a SBA Senior Business Analyst out of the New York office. I studied business at Cornell undergrad. So I was in the Dyson School, if anyone is a Cornell student on the call. I started at the same time as Lynn and Evan. We were all in the same start class actually. So all started during the pandemic. Same as them, wide variety of industries. I've been on 11 different projects at the firm, you know, varying from due diligence projects within our transactions and transformation practice to the traditional procurement and supply chain. So a lot of variability from my end as well. And looking forward to talking to you guys a little bit about the recruiting process today.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Just again, Grace Palmieri, recruiting coordinator based out of Chicago. I graduated from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in 2021. So if we have any fighting Illini on the phone, as always, ILL. And we're going to go ahead and kick off into the agenda for today. So just to begin, we're going to have an interview process overview. Then we will kind of dive into an example of the case and do a deep dive there. And then third, the general tips for the interview overall. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to, I believe, Claire.
Yeah, that's me. So our interview process is really testing 3 different pillars. So we have our behavioral interviews, our case interview and presentation, as well as our testing of experience. So there's 3 different aspects we're really judging our candidates on. And these kind of test 2 different areas, interpersonal skills as well as technical skills. So think about the way that we would talk in a conversation, as well as the skills that you would need to complete a project. So that's anything from Excel to different types of analytical modeling and areas of expertise in the technical area. So those are the 3 focuses of our interview process. Content-wise, you can expect the first round interview to be 1 45-minute behavioral interview and then 1 45-minute case interview. Then you will be notified if you move on, you're passed to the second round, and the second and final round consists of 1 45-minute behavioral and then 2 case interviews. And these are kind of all testing those 3 pillars I mentioned on the prior page. You can expect to have to talk to each of those areas, whether it's technical expertise or the other areas that we're focused on here at Kearney throughout our interview process. So when so some of you might not even know what a behavioral interview is, and that's so okay. The behavioral interview is really just looking at some of your past behavior and performances and saying, okay, this is how they performed in the past, this is how they've acted in the past, and that's probably a good indicator of their future performance. So what we're really looking for at the end of the day is someone with a can-do attitude, a will-do attitude, someone that has that positive attitude that will really indicate success in this type of work. And the way that you want to approach a lot of these is what we call SAO. So the way that you would answer a question for behavioral is you kind of first outline the scenario. So what's the situation that you were facing? What was the task at hand? Then you look into the action. So you've outlined the scenario. Now you say, this is what I did. And you can definitely be pretty numerical and tactical with this type of action that you've completed. So, increasing sales by 100%. That's a really good quantitative number to show that you've demonstrated impact. And that's kind of what you would go into the outcome here is like, how did you make that impact? What was the percentage? What did you change? Yeah. So I think this is a good way to kind of, you learn what a behavioral interview is now, and now we can say that there's 3 areas that we're really looking at in these behavioral interviews. So the first aspect is pretty straightforward, something that everyone can definitely perfect pretty quickly because it's just talking about yourself. So walking through the resume, I think this should be pretty quick. You should have a very, kind of rehearsed way of approaching this and saying your name, your school, your education, some of the highlight experiences that really apply to a role, not only in consulting, but a role in Kearney. So you should really tie in the introduction into why you're here interviewing with us today and why you're passionate about Kearney. Don't ramble. It can be very concise and very tight because this is something you're going to see throughout all your interviews. For past experience, it's really explaining different situations that you're probably highlighting on your resume. So using that framework that I described on the page before and really describing that situation, describing the actions, and then the outcomes of those situations. It's a really great way to summarize your past success and that's how we indicate future success. So that's what I would recommend there. And then one of the key bullets here is quantitative and qualitative results. So pulling in those numbers where you can and showing that you made real quantitative impact is a great way to highlight how you can be successful at Kearney. The last is kind of a personality and fit behavioral. So how do you prioritize your schedule? Who is someone you admire and why? These are just kind of more fun questions to get to know you as a person and to make sure that you are a good fit for Kearney and that you would be excited to work with our consultants. And one thing to highlight I just saw this bullet, ask for a few seconds if you need to. Maybe some of these questions you haven't heard before, you're not prepared for. That's okay. You can say, give me a second. Can I have 1 second? And then you can come back with a structured response rather than rambling and kind of coming up with something that isn't indicative of a well thought out response or answer. Yeah, so we're going to transition into talking about the case interview, which is obviously a very important aspect of our interview process. So I think it's really analyzing kind of 3 key areas. We want to understand and evaluate your analytical skills. So can you think logically? Can you structure a question and answer? And the second piece is really seeing if you can tolerate ambiguity and data overload. So throwing a lot at you and the way that you respond to getting a lot thrown at you and the way that you structure your thoughts is really important in consulting. And then the third piece is, you're getting tested in these areas that might seem overwhelming, but we really want to assess your poise and communication skills. So oftentimes I'll be on a call and I'll be confused or something, or I'll be overwhelmed. And the way that I respond is super calm and I'm very fine on the call. And it's so funny because someone will DM me after and be like, Claire, like you seemed fine on that call, even though that you did like clearly we're overwhelmed. And that's just a very important aspect of this job, is just having poise and being able to handle a situation that might seem like a lot at the time. So I'll pass it on to Evan and Lynn to do the case.
Thanks, Steph. All right, so for the next few minutes, what we're going to do is Lynn and I are going to go through this case live in the room. So, I am interviewing Lynn. Lynn is the interviewee, but we're going to make this interactive. So we're gonna pause throughout, and basically we want you to do this case with us. So, as Lynn is writing out her framework, as Lynn is working through the math, work through it yourself as well. And that'll be the way for you to get the most out of this. So, that being said, Lynn, are you ready to do this case?
Yeah, I am.
All right. So, the client, EV Dealer Co., is an electric vehicle manufacturer and dealer. They own the car sales process for electric vehicles specifically, from design to sales, and their market share has grown for 10 consecutive years to reach 5% of the North American market. So you can assume that 10 years ago, their market share was well under 1%. However, due to a variety of factors, both internal and external to our client, they're facing declining profitability. Today, 90% of the client's parts are sourced from China, though their entire supply chain, manufacturing supply chain, is located in the US. They sell 85% of their product through physical dealerships. The remaining 15% are sold through other channels, either digital, which means e-commerce in this case, or customer service. The client is a mission-driven company, and they're trying to make the global transportation network more sustainable. But they are very concerned about their profitability. They've hired our firm to explain the current situation and provide recommendations to get the company back on track. The two main questions that they want us to answer are: what are the main drivers of their poor profitability, and what steps can they take to address these issues to get back on track?
Got it. Thanks for giving the situation. So let me just play it back to you to make sure I have all of the details correct.
Sure.
So our client is EV Dealer Co. They both design, manufacture, and sell electric vehicles. So they've been growing year over year over the past 10 years in the North American market particularly. So they own about 5% market share in NA. However, their profitability has been impacted recently by both internal and external factors. And this is where the client wants us to really deep dive, understand what are drivers and what they can do to mitigate that. A couple of call outs additionally are they source a lot of their parts from China, but their supply chain is based in the US, and then 85% is physical dealership, whereas the other 15 is DTC or e-channel. Okay.
Yeah, I think you've got it.
Awesome. So before we dive in, I want to clarify a couple of questions with you.
Sure.
So in terms of the competitive landscape, when we look at electric vehicle, are they the primary EV dealer manufacturer within their space? Is the market very fragmented, or is it pretty consolidated?
Yeah, good question. So there are other companies that make electric vehicles, but there's no other direct competitor that only makes electric vehicles. So if you think about the automotive space, you have your traditional combustible engine manufacturers, and some of them have started to create electric vehicles, but it's not driving the majority of anyone else's revenue.
Got it. So our client is the only one that's very focused on selling
Exactly.
EV. Got it.
Yeah.
And in terms of geographic footprint, I know you mentioned North America. Are they North America centric? Are they planning on expanding globally?
They're North America centric for now. So it's possibly something we could explore to expand globally. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, those are the clarifying questions I have. Let me just take a few minutes and jot down my framework.
Absolutely. So while Lynn is jotting down her framework, Lynn did a great job of listening and reading the case as it was presented. And one really important thing that I think she did was she played it back to make sure she captured all the key details. And then she went through some clarifying questions. You don't need to ask clarifying questions unless you don't understand something, but it can be really helpful, to get more information that you might use later in the case. And then you want to put together your framework, which Lynn is doing right now. And the point of that framework is to start thinking through some hypotheses. So we'll talk more through frameworks in a second, but if we go to the next page, let's just pause and give everyone a minute to write up a possible framework for this case while Lynn does the same. All right, are you ready to share your framework?
Yeah, definitely. So one tip at this moment, so I think taking a step back, when we actually go to a case interview, I would recommend bringing those like A4, like white paper with no lines, just plain white paper. And that way you can really draw out your framework, and you can walk your interviewers through your framework, like kind of being a very clearly way. And actually, their interviews are going to be virtual, right?
Yes.
Okay, never mind. But in any event, so thanks again for walking me through the case. So I think our client's main target is to increase their profitability. So when we look at profitability, there are two kind of branches of that tree. So we look at revenue and then cost. So on the revenue side, I think we'll definitely want to look at what's their price per unit, what's their pricing strategy per unit, and then how many units are they selling. So looking at volume and price, what's the trend there historically. And then on the cost side, I think two buckets there as well. So variable cost and fixed cost. And then within your variable cost, want to look at raw material, direct labor, logistics, transportation, etc. And then fixed cost is SG&A, indirect labor. So I think based on just kind of the recent supply chain dynamics and all the things that have been going on, I would like to deep dive into the variable cost first and just see how what the breakdown is within variable cost and what the trend has been in the past 2 or 3 years. So do you have any more information on that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into the variable cost. So the client actually provided us with some key data for the past 3 years. So if we take a look at the next page, we have a series of financial data from the client. So do you want to talk me through what you see here?
Yeah, definitely. So what we're looking at here is their annual financial data for 2019 through 2021. So we have both volume, how many units were sold, as well as average price per unit. So how much each car costs, the price of each car. And then underneath that, we have the cost of goods sold. So for each car, how much does it take to manufacture? So I think I want to clarify one question here. Is the cost here fully total loaded cost, or is it only contains certain portions of the cost?
So it is essentially the cost of goods sold that goes into their gross margin calculation.
Okay.
So that they do have other costs, but you can assume for the purposes of this exercise that the client cares about gross margin
Got it.
as it pertains to profitability.
Got it. Understood. Yeah, and then using that, we can obviously calculate your unit margin as well as your gross margin. So from this point, so 2019 numbers are populated. So I think the next step will be calculating the 2020 and 2021 unit and gross margin. So for unit margin, it's your average price per unit minus your COGS. So for 2020, it will be 45,000 minus 33,000, which will be 12,000. And then for 2021, it will be 45,500 minus 36,500, which will be $16,000. Right, sorry, it will be $9,000. And then, so call out here, definitely do your math on paper if you need to, as opposed to doing it in your head. So with that, we do see the unit margin kind of decreasing over the years, particularly between 2020 and 2021. And then to calculate your gross margin, we'll take your unit margin and multiply that by your units sold. So we'll take $12,000, multiply that by 200,000, which will be,
A lot of zeros.
Yeah, a lot of zeros. So it will be 2.4. Yeah, $2.4 billion. And then for 2021, we'll take your 400,000 units sold, multiply that by the 9,000 unit margin, which will be $3.6 billion. So you do see, so here, I think very interesting trend. First, unit margin has decreased dramatically over 2 years. So that's primarily driven by your COGS going up by like roughly 10%, whereas your average unit price kind of didn't really change year over year. So that's a big driver. But if we look at your total units sold, I think from a sales perspective, doing pretty well. Like you tend to double your sales in 2021, but that could be due to your lower price compared to maybe your competitor set. So definitely, I think a couple areas to look at here. First is from a COGS perspective, what are the components of these COGS, and can we see what's driving this COGS increase? And then on a separate side, we can, I think another opportunity here be looking at their competitor pricing and see if there's any pricing opportunity here. So do you have more information on the COGS breakdown?
Yeah, we do. And I just want to make one point before we move on. Lynn did a couple really important things there. One is not just writing down her math, but she's also talking through her math. So, especially in a virtual interview setting, I can't necessarily see the piece of paper she's writing on. I, as your interviewer, want to help you through this case. We're working together. So the more that you communicate, especially when it comes to the math, the more that I can help you. Lynn is doing a great job with the math, so she doesn't need my help, but sometimes it can be tricky, and so it's just better to talk through. And then the other thing that Lynn did there was she summarized what the numbers we were looking at meant, and then dove right into the next steps. So we do have some more information on cost of goods sold. If we take a look at this next page here, we have what appears to be a breakdown of cost from the client.
Yeah, so here, I think it's a follow-up on the previous page. So out of the COGS, the unit cost, what's the composition of each, right? So 4 buckets here we're looking at is raw materials, logistics, direct labor, and other. But if we actually look at the trends within each category, I think what stood out kind of right off the bat is your raw materials and your direct labor. Raw materials didn't change year over year. whereas your labor kind of it increased a little bit, but it's probably like following the market trend, inflation, etc. But what really drove the change in your COGS year over year is from logistics. So from 2019 through 2020, logistics cost increased by 5,500, and then another 3,000 from 2020 to 2021. So this is very likely due to kind of the macroeconomic situation that went on during COVID, when supply chain was when capacity was constrained, and all of that. So I know you mentioned the clients like raw material sourcing is based out of China, whereas all of their like distribution and their customer base is in North America. So I think one area to look at is, are there alternative sourcing opportunities? Can they look at sourcing from a closer geographic locations that might reduce like logistics cost? So we want to look at kind of from a total COGS perspective, what different like regions sourcing from different places will look like. So do you have any study that shows that?
That's a great question. I think those are some really good observations about the logistic costs. So we do actually have some data. So we have an internal database at Kearney that tracks logistics costs. So if we take a look here, we have the three top locations for our client in terms of the parts that they source. That these are really the three options. So I guess what do you notice in this data?
Yeah, so looking at this data, so comparing the three regions, if we look at raw materials, kind of going like country by country, if we look at raw materials, I mean, China obviously has the lowest from a raw materials perspective, but it also has the highest logistics cost out of the three options here, if we look at the 2022 forecasted number. Whereas if we look at Australia, it's kind of it's also on the higher end, so it's about $30,500. Whereas Brazil, the total cost, the sum between raw materials and logistics is around, it's also 30,500. So whereas China, it's 33,500. So I'll definitely want to double click into Australia and Brazil and see what kind of the geographic footprint will look like for the two countries. But at the same time, kind of just thinking like globally speaking, like Australia as a country, it's in the APAC region. All of the logistics and transportation from that region will have to be done through ocean freight, which, as you probably know, has been pretty challenging recently, just in terms of capacity and getting containers and congestions and all of that. So I think even though the numbers total out to be pretty similar, it kind of just based on how the macroeconomic trend has been going, it feels like Brazil would be a better option when it comes to a future kind of potential alternative sourcing area. So I think the next step will be kind of just so that we have a full view, is to adding the other buckets of labor and the other costs, and to see what the fully total landed COGS would be for the three regions, so that we can make a more informed decision, if you have that information as well.
Sure. Yep. Our research team has pulled together a view of overall what the cost would look like from each of the regions. So if we take a look at the next page, and I just want to call out before we go through this math, if you have knowledge of a particular industry or anything like that, it's awesome to bring it into a case. Lynn knows logistics really well, and the expectation would not be that you're an expert on freight sourcing or ocean logistics in a case interview. So awesome to add that in, but that's not the expectation as you're going through a case. But that being said, so let's work through these calculations now.
Yeah, so I think COGS pretty straightforward. So we'll just sum up the four buckets. So for China, it will be 12,500 plus 21,000 plus, which will be 33,500, and then plus 7,000 plus 2,000. So add 9,000 to that, you will get 42,500. And for Australia, you will get 16,000 plus 14,500, which is 30,500, and then add 9,000 to that, which will be 39,500. And then Brazil, you get 30,500 plus 9,000, so also 39,500. So yeah, Australia and Brazil, pretty similar in terms of gross margin in the end. But I think just based on the geographic location, like Brazil is a lot closer to North America. So definitely, I think out of the two, it will pose less risk. So I think tying it back to kind of the original framework that put together. So I think we've looked at the cost side. So by switching your sourcing to probably Brazil, you will have a pretty good profitability improvement. I think the other piece we want to look at would be the pricing side. So I know their pricing hasn't really changed year over year. So if you have any competitive study on pricing, we'd love to take a look. Otherwise, happy to kind of estimate what the profitability will look like if they were to increase their price.
Yeah. So I think we don't have that type of data now. It's a great question, but we can actually skip ahead a couple pages. I think just for the sake of time, we'll work ahead past this profitability calculation. It's a pretty straightforward one, and we've worked through a lot of the math. So now at this point, I think it's pretty clear between the three countries what the different cost structures look like. Before we go back to the client, the focus has been on the cost, and that's the data that we were provided, the variable costs. But we'd like to just have a perspective on revenue and fixed costs. So maybe we can just think through together some ways that we would suggest addressing revenue and fixed costs to the client.
Yeah, can I just take a moment to gather my thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I would say the 3 times during a case where you can gather your thoughts would be, your framework at the beginning, any type of brainstorming question, and then your conclusion at the end. And I will say different interviewers will approach cases differently. Always you'll have an opportunity to write out your framework. In terms of brainstorming and conclusion, sometimes an interviewer will say, yes, gather your thoughts, as I did with Lynn. Other times they might say, let's just talk through it together. And so just be prepared for that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So I think on the revenue side, so I think 2 parts to your question: revenue and fixed cost.
Yeah.
So I think on the revenue side, I think a couple of different plays here. So I think I see broadly there are 3 different plays. You can do a pricing play, just change your price and make it a better pricing that won't necessarily impact your volume, but will be on par with the competitors.
Sure.
The second way is to kind of introduce new product, so kind of really grow your volume from that perspective. And then the third potential play I see is a channel play. So go from can you reach new customers and expand your volume by switching from like physical retail to more kind of the e-commerce and all of that for EV. So I think that's definitely 3 areas to look at for revenue, as well as like expanding into new markets and all of that. And then on the fixed cost perspective, I think so the main buckets of fixed cost are like real estate, your overhead, your SG&A, and all of that. So I think a couple ways of reducing that would be first like looking at your current like manufacturing footprint and all of your like distribution centers, locations, and see if there's some network optimization opportunities that you can do. Maybe close down some DCs and just to move capacity around. The second way I see is more around can you like do a reorg and look at your SG&A and overhead and see if there's synergy opportunities that like as you grow you have been neglecting over time. And then the third I would say is more kind of switching, kind of goes in line with the revenue play, right? It's just shifting from physical retailers to more of e-commerce. That way you need fewer storefronts and less real estate asset. So yeah, I think those are the few kind of big picture opportunities. I think, of course, to validate those, we definitely need to look at the actual business case and understand the potential risk and impact for each of those opportunities as well.
Absolutely. I think those are all great options and certainly more that we could explore, but I think that gives us a good base to take to the client. So now let's get back to it. We're getting ready for our final client meeting. So let's circle back. What are the main drivers of core profitability for this client?
Yeah, I just take a moment and just gather my thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah, so one thing we found through the exercise is the profitability is driven mainly by their lower price, probably compared to their competitors, as well as higher transportation costs because of the sourcing from China. So I recommend changing your sourcing partner to a different geographic location that's closer to North America to reduce your logistics cost. And one thing we looked at was Brazil. So with that, there are several risks, of course, that need to be assessed. One is changing your suppliers. You need to make sure the supplier qualifications still meet your standards. You need to make sure as you shift suppliers, it won't impact your overall supply chain, it won't interrupt your manufacturing. So definitely need to have an implementation plan roadmap to go along with that. So with that, the next step would definitely be going to the geographic region of preference and evaluating suppliers and assess who will be your ultimate suppliers and develop a timeline roadmap to go with that. So yeah, those are the summary. Any questions?
No, I think all of that makes sense. Thank you. And now we can present this to our client. All right. So that is the conclusion of this case. I know we just covered a lot very quickly. So we have plenty of time to debrief and do questions, and we can jump back through the case. I just want to reiterate again before we get into debrief that the level at which Lynn went through that case is not the level at which you would be expected to go through the case. We wanted to just give an example of how you would go through a case seamlessly, but in reality, no case interview is ever seamless. I can speak to my own interviews when I was interviewing with Kearney and other firms. They certainly weren't that good. Maybe Lynn's were, but so for real, there's a lot of room for error as you work through cases.
Yeah.
But with that being said, maybe we can just jump forward a couple pages, Grace, and I think Claire can talk us through a debrief. Claire.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kind of summarize the debrief here. So as you could see, Evan and Lynn did a great job here of addressing some of the questions that Evan came up with. And I think I'll highlight a couple things that I thought they did a great job of. So for the first question, is the candidate relaxed and confident? Lynn obviously approached each of these answers very calmly. So kind of what I talked about earlier, maybe some of the numbers or the topics maybe threw her off, but she reacted very calmly and asked clarifying questions. So that's very important. The second one, analytical horsepower was obviously highlighted throughout. Lynn handled all of the math problems with ease, did it all in her head. So that's very impressive. I very much wrote down all the math, and then to Evan's point, it's very important to talk through it, because if you talk through the math that you're doing, that's when the interviewer can step in and say, maybe you should rethink that, or maybe you should reframe the way you're considering that. So it's a good way to make sure that you don't hit any roadblocks throughout the case. So very important to do that. And I think really important that Lynn kept asking clarifying questions. She was looking at the situation. She wanted to see specific questions at the beginning to understand how this was going to play out. And each time she went through a math problem, she gave really, really good insight that helped drive the case forward. So she would say, this seems like a good situation. She would say, I'd want to double click on these countries. Australia, her piece on Australia being in the APAC region and then bringing in her ocean freight expertise. I mean, it seems like maybe you wouldn't have expertise in all of these areas, but I remember from my first case, it was a pricing case, and I had just been in a pricing class at Cornell, and I was able to bring in some of the pricing mechanisms that I learned at the class, and that kind of thing happens all the time where you just happen to have experience in these areas, and it's a really good way to highlight that and bring that into the interview, and a really good way to set yourself apart. So those were just a few examples of how Lynn really drove home what the interviews are looking for. Yeah, I mean, this, I think, screenshot this, like, make sure that you're doing all of these things. You really want to be in a private space, close your dorm room, book a room in your university, whatever you need to do to make sure that you're not going to be interrupted, because this is something that you can avoid. It's definitely something that you can handle in advance. Make sure you have a neutral background. So I have an example of a neutral background right now. I'm in my room working from home, but it's this background that's built into the virtual platform so that you're not distracted by what's behind me, which is my window. So anything could be flying about or distracting you from the topic at hand, which you don't want to do. Dress professionally. So what you would wear to a normal interview is appropriate for this type of situation. And make sure that technology is working. You can check these things in advance. So we do understand that technology issues come up, but it's something that you can make sure is working. We've lived in a virtual world for a while, so doing everything you can to minimize those type of distractions that would take away from your performance in the case is super important. Last piece is something I'm super bad at, which is maintaining eye contact. So putting a sticky note on your computer, doing anything that you can to make sure that you're looking at the camera and not your face or your interviewer's face, which is probably in a random place on your computer, is a good way to stay engaging, make sure that they're observing, looking at you, and making sure that you have the most success possible. And then to Lynn's point, really important to take notes on a blank piece of paper. Make sure that you're participating. I take notes literally every day for work, and it makes me, like, here's my notebook. I don't know, you guys maybe can see it. Yeah. So I make sure that I take notes during every single call that I'm in, just because I think it's a really good way to make sure that you're paying attention to what's happening rather than getting distracted by notifications on your computer or emails or anything that's coming through electronically. And that's just as important for this. So having very structured notes, knowing how you're going to approach the problem, you're able to practice a lot of case interviews in advance. So it's the way that you would approach this going forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for going through that. That was super helpful. We've been getting a lot of questions in the Q&A chat and through Slido. So we're gonna take this last 15 minutes or so to direct some of these questions to Lynn, Evan, and Claire, and then I'll save some of the recruiting deadlines and important information at the end for you all. So just jumping right in, Evan, I'm going to call out you here for just your best interview tips and something that you would really recommend for someone who gets stuck during either the case interview or tough questions during behavioral.
Yeah. So I'll start with the second part. If you get stuck, then just ask for help. What I said during the case was that I was working through it with Lynn. I wanted her to get through it. She didn't need much of my help, but in a regular case, you're working through it with your interviewer, and it's not just okay to ask for help. Like you should if you get stuck, because you have a finite amount of time, usually 30 to 45 minutes, and sometimes the cases can be difficult to get through. So you don't want to spin your wheels. In terms of interview tips, I think, from a behavioral perspective, you want to just really be able to give all of your answers some thought beforehand. You want to prep for behavioral. So I think a lot of times you'll see people that are really well prepared for the case, then their behaviorals are a little bit more disjointed. So just make sure that you spend the proper amount of time on behaviorals, because it is really important. And then from a case perspective, I mean, I think we have more questions around casing. So I'll hold back a little bit, but I think high level, you want to just really work on each of the skills individually. So the way that I see casing is that you have your math, everybody knows that. You have your framework, which is kind of your problem solving and your brainstorming. And then you have these other qualitative portions, which you're not going to be an industry expert on these things. So it's really more about your approach. And then you kind of have these soft skills that go along with it. So your communication, your ability to synthesize, your ability to work through the case and communicate with your interviewer and make it collaborative. Each of those skills are kind of separate pieces that you can work on and bring it all together in the case. So those are kind of my high level thoughts for interview tips.
Awesome, thanks. Next question, Claire, I'm going to hand this one to you. And just that this example showed, will the information that you're given be released step by step, like we saw just during this case through the interview process? And if so, should you verify your previous hypothesis step by step based on the new information rather than asking all of the questions at the beginning?
Yeah, so typically it's going to be step by step like this. So a great way to kind of harken back to that original hypothesis is, saying as you're getting that new information, saying, well, I originally assumed this based off of the initial information, but now we've updated that information with new data. And because of this, I'm adjusting my hypothesis and I'm thinking about this going forward. So it's a really good way to make sure that you're alluding to the fact that you had an initial thought before looking into the information, and the fact that you're refining and becoming more analytical as you move through the case.
Great, thank you. Lynn, for this one, are the cases set as interviewer-led or candidate-led? And does it depend on the interviewer?
I think it should largely be interviewee-led. So I don't know if you noticed, but during the case, I was prompting questions. As I drew up my framework, I was asking the next step, kind of guiding the conversation in the direction I want to guide. But also a very important part to go with that is kind of explaining your logic and your thought behind why you want the case to go a certain direction versus another one. So in our situation, I talked about, I think, cost first, and then within cost, I talked about variable cost, and I gave my reasoning around why I want to look into that area first. So I think it being interviewee led, you need to both lead it, but also explain your rationale behind the direction you're going. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Evan. If you have not done cases before, or you're not generally knowledgeable on a subject, what would you say is the best tool or trick to get started?
Yeah. So I think two pretty different questions there. If you have not done cases before, I would say, it depends on the type of learner that you are. So there's really good books, Case in Point and Case Interview Secrets, that are really helpful if you are starting from scratch. And I think those are really common places that people start. I personally didn't use them. I prefer to learn by doing. I just couldn't get through either of those books. But the alternative is to find some case books. There's plenty online that you can find. Lots of good casing resources, and just start working through them. And the best is if you can find someone to case with, and just start practicing. And it's going to be challenging, but you'll get the hang of it. Ideally, if you've never done it before, you want to find someone who's experienced, who can help you get kind of the flow and understand the different types of exercises that go into a case and give you good feedback. But I think those would be the two kind of places you can start is either, reading through the books or even watching YouTube videos online. There's lots of good casing resources, or just start doing cases. In terms of topical knowledge, again, the expectation is not that you would have topical knowledge on, ocean freight or any industry really. I mean, I don't think there's any level of expectation that you bring a bunch of knowledge to the table. That being said, what that means is that you're going to have to really index on your problem solving. So, you're not familiar with the automotive space. You don't know anything about electric vehicles. You don't know anything about logistics. That's fine. But what you need to do is you need to be able to think through a problem, and you need to be able to understand general business concepts. So a profitability framework with revenue and costs and what goes into revenue and variable and fixed costs, and being able to break it down to the level where you can understand you have labor costs, you have materials costs, you have logistics costs, things like that. That's what you need to know, but you don't need to go become an expert on any particular industry or function to do well in case interviews.
Awesome. Thank you. Claire, do you have any tips for turning the interview into a conversation rather than, more formal, or some general icebreakers that have really helped you or you've seen throughout the interview process?
Yeah. I think the first thing I'd say is this really depends on the person and the situation on who's interviewing you. So that's actually a skill that's tested. So some people be very professional and towards the case, and they're not going to want to be casual, but you can read pretty quickly if a casual atmosphere works well. The example I give is, if you're doing a case that has to do with the profitability of a coffee chain, there's a situation where you're doing a market sizing of that coffee chain, and you're thinking, the way that I made that casual is I think, I say something casual like, the typical person probably drinks 1 coffee a day, but I'm a coffee addict, so I have 4 to 5 cups. And that's obviously something silly to say, it's kind of crazy, but it stands out in an interview because it's adding your character and your personality into the interview rather than just kind of casually, being so straight and narrow about the entire thing. And for me, I think that really helped me through the interview process because it allowed me to be more casual and comfortable in myself, which is really something that we love to see in potential consultants. And it also just kind of breaks the ice a little and makes it a little more comfortable. So I encourage you to bring in personal anecdotes like that one as much as you can, within the realms of appropriability, of course. Don't tie everything back to yourself, but a few lines like that can really help set you apart during the case.
Great, thanks. This one I'm going to open up to all 3 of you. So whoever wants to start it off, but just a general question about Kearney. What are some of your favorite things about the firm? Just feel free to share any of your favorite experiences or memories that you've had here at Kearney.
Yes, I will share my final round interview experience. So I went to Michigan. My final round was a makeup round in the New York office. It was my fall break. So I don't know if any of you on the call went to Michigan, but during fall break, a tradition is a lot of the senior class will go to Vegas during that long weekend. So while a lot of my friends were flying to Vegas, I was flying to New York for my final round, and I told all of my interviewers that. So when they asked, "Are you staying in Vegas for the week? Are you staying in New York for the weekend?" I told all of them I'm going to Vegas right after the interview, and all of them they supported me, and they were very excited for my Vegas trip. One of them actually went to Michigan and said I'll have fun because he went on the same trip 4 or 5 years ago, which is pretty fun. And then a partner called me while I was boarding my flight to Vegas to give me the good news so that I could celebrate. That's definitely my favorite Kearney memory, and I think it just speaks to the people at the firm here. Everyone's really down to earth, and people are super friendly, and we have a really strong sense of cohort and community here. So yeah, that's my favorite thing about Kearney.
I think that's a great answer. I think for me, one of the things that I really like about the firm is I think you have a lot of flexibility to kind of drive your own path, and that kind of manifests in a lot of different ways. It can mean the type of projects you work on. I think all three of us have worked on a pretty wide variety as generalists over our first couple years at the firm. It's the different things that you can get involved in. So for me, social impact has been a big one, but there's lots of different ways to get involved, and just generally kind of what you want out of your career and the pace that you want to go at. I think there's a lot of flexibility in that. So I think overall it's a very entrepreneurial self-starter type environment, where you can kind of really create your own path.
Love both of those answers. I remember you telling me that story, Len. It's so funny. It's so relatable. That's a good way to add personality into the interviews. So for me, I would say one of my favorite aspects of Kearney is the ability to get involved in things outside of your project work. So at the firm, we call this firm building. Evan just talked about how he's pretty involved in social impact. That's just one of the many, many things that Evan's involved in. But for me, I really, really like event planning. So I've taken a pretty large role in planning events in the New York office. And I would say it's something that is kind of a side passion of mine, reaching out to venues, planning exactly how the event is going to work out. So like the logistics behind it and getting RSVPs and getting quotes and negotiating those quotes is just something that I've really honed over the past 2 years. Never would have expected me to, but it's just a fun way to get involved, and it's been a great way for me to meet people, because when you're event planning on the social committee in the New York office, you really are exposed to a bunch of different people from partner to BA level, and it keeps me very involved in the office. So definitely something that I love about the firm.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to move into some of the upcoming key dates for our recruiting process, just to kind of close us off here. And by the way, if your question did not get answered, I know my colleague Jen Yu is going to send that email that you can see down below in the chat also, just so we can make sure that all of you guys are getting to the right place by, these key dates that you can see up here. So tomorrow actually will be the resume drop deadline for our full-time BA role. That will close at 12 p.m. Eastern. So if you have not yet applied, make sure you do that before that time. Tomorrow, September 15th, next week, will be the case workshop webinar. So that will be before, first round interviews take place. So you'll get a little more practice there. The week of September 19th will be first round interviews for the full-time business analyst role. And then moving into September 30th, that week, we will have final round interviews as well following. For the undergraduate business analyst intern position, we will have that close on October 2nd at 11:59 p.m. Central. And that drop deadline will be then. Following the week of October 10th, first round interviews will take place virtually as well. And then lastly, October 21st, we will have final round interviews virtually as well, again there. So thank you guys so much again. Thank you to our panelists, Evan, Lynn, and Claire, for helping us out today. And I hope you guys all have a great recruiting season, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck. Thanks.